Hillary is 51 and her husband Mark is 55. They want to retire within 10 years so they can sell their home and travel the world, but the problem is they were told by their advisor that they have to work until the age of 70. Tune in so I can show you how the advice that advisor gave is probably wrong and what they can do instead to accelerate their goals, travel the world, and live the retirement they want to live. Joining me on today's Retirement Makeover is Hillary. Hillary, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. You're 51. Your husband is 55. You are thinking about retirement. I'm curious, what got you really serious about kind of putting retirement front and center of your plans right now?
We traveled to Europe this year for the first time, and I kind of got the travel bug and just I want to travel the world. And I'd like to retire and travel full time and just be free from like probably sell our house. And anyway, so I'd like to know how soon we can do that so that we won't be too old to, be in shape for that kind of travel.
What does full time mean? Does that mean every other month you're flying back and forth to Europe?
No, I mean, I might fly back to the US a couple times a year. I would think, start out in Asia. It's cheaper to live there, stay for a month at a time in different locations. We have kids who are currently teenagers, so we would, I assume want to see them at least a couple times a year, and my parents as well. But I would hope for several years to be able to travel more full time and not be at home much at all.
So you're really doing it. And when you're really doing it, are you getting a residence in Asia, getting a residence in Europe? Are you staying in hotels or hostel? What does that look like? So we can start to think about expenses and how to plan for that.
This is above exactly what I've researched, but I do watch a lot of people who do travel channels, and Airbnb for a month. If you stay for a month, you get a cheaper rate, basically. It seems like a lot of people are traveling for 3,000 to 4,000 a month, all in, including their health insurance, all their expenses, accommodations and food and entertainment and everything. So it
Yeah.
seems like it's cheaper than living here where I live, anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to uncover on today's episode is you and your husband in early to mid 50s, a little over 600,000 or so saved to retirement accounts, a goal of being able to make this happen in called a decade. And the question is, can we do this? We don't know what we don't know. So what's ahead of us? And what are the things we need to start thinking about to make this reality? Before we do that, I want to stay on the travel subject just a little bit longer. You mentioned before we started recording that you've done this trip, and by this trip, I mean gone overseas exactly one time. How long were you abroad for when you took this trip?
We were out of the country for 2 weeks.
And what was that like when you returned home? Your conversation with your husband? Did you prompt this? Say we're going to go live in abroad when we retire? Did he bring it up?
Well, I will start with the fact that we have moved many times over the past 15 years, just because we wanted to. I work from home and we can live wherever we want to. So we kind of have traveled a little bit before that, just because we wanted to. Well, when we went to Europe and then we came back, we had, for several reasons, I had thought to myself, oh, I could just move to France. And it's cheaper over there. But I didn't say anything because that sounds crazy. And then about a week later, my husband said, so when can we move to Germany? And so I
Those
was
sound
surprised that it wasn't just me. I thought he would think I was crazy for saying it. So anyway, he actually said it first.
Well, I love it. It's big and it's bold, and I think the message I try to get across to people when retirement planning is to start with that big dream. What would you look like if there were no constraints? What would life look like if there was no constraints? And start with that. Maybe it's possible, and all this is great. Maybe it's not possible. And we say, okay, well, what is, and how do we start prioritizing the things that are most impactful to come up with a plan that's right for you? So let's jump into your numbers, Hillary, so we can start to see, is this doable? What types of things might you need to do? And to start with, here's just a snapshot of net worth today. So you have your investments, and your investments are your 401k, Mark's IAP plan, simple IRA. You have a brokerage account, so the trust account here. You do own your home, worth about 600,000. On your home, there's a mortgage, so about 50% equity in the property, and the mortgage payment today is $1,433 per month for the principal and interest portion of the mortgage. So one of the things I'd imagine is if you're going to take this trip or take these travels, you would sell the home to fund a lot of this. Is that correct?
Yes, we would either sell the home or if our kids were interested in living here, perhaps we would. I don't know if we'd rent it out otherwise, but if it was for our kids, we would let them live here.
Let them live there. Okay. So let's plan for the time being as if that home stays, meaning let's not start with the assumption that there's a few $100,000 of equity that just, I won't say falls in your lap, but that becomes available when you retire and go take these trips and these travels, because there is a chance that the children might stay here. So let's start with that. The goals that we're looking at here are to retire in 10 years. So you're 51 today, Mark's 55 today. We're assuming that you're both going to continue to work for 10 more years before you make this happen. Retirement expenses, $2,000 per month. I want to really look closely at that. Where does that number come from? Because initial thoughts are, it strikes me as a bit on the low side.
It was $2,000 a month in addition to our housing expenses. So
Correct.
currently we spend about 3,000 a month. So that is actually assuming travel and that it would
Mm-hmm.
be cheaper to
Mm-hmm.
travel.
And so, yes, thank you for bringing that up. This is in addition to the housing. So the housing, the property taxes, the principal and interest payment, we're going to account for that separately. This retirement expenses that we're looking at this is Hillary and Mark's just core monthly expenses,
Yes.
food, utilities, fuel, all those types of things. So 3,000 per month today is what you're currently spending. The 2,000 per month, is that through looking at a list of your expenses today and seeing what might change, or is that more of an estimate of what you think it might be?
A combination in that I would like our expenses to be lower if it means moving somewhere else where it's not as expensive as where we live now. I don't think they will be as high as they currently are. So it's kind of an estimate and a few things I can imagine being cut, certainly, from what we
Yeah.
currently have.
Okay, very good. So we'll come back to this because one of the things that we always want to do with planning is stress test of what if things look good at 2,000 per month, but as soon as they hit 2,500 per month, not so good.
Mm.
What then? So we'll come back. I've also added this as a placeholder of, do we need to add an extra amount, maybe even for the first 10 years, 20 years of retirement of when you are traveling, almost like that extra travel. The you're gonna be more active, you're gonna be doing more things. Do we want to have a bit more in our budget to enjoy it? You know, you might call it the go-go years of retirement of, let's have a little bit more for the first chunk of time before starting to scale back. Annual retirement healthcare costs. So obviously moving abroad potentially throws a wrinkle into this of, are you getting foreign healthcare, which is potentially coming at no cost or different costs? So that's something that I will say that this here is a placeholder, Hillary, of average costs of healthcare, depending on certain things here in the States, but this is something we'd want to dial in a bit more. And then annual retirement long-term care costs. This is also nationwide averages for in-home care, assuming that both you and Mark needed it for the final 2 years of your lives. Statistically, probably both of you aren't needing it for 2 full years, but we start with this in your plan just to see what if, and then we can plan around what if that's not the case. So these are the starting points. These are the goals. I do want to test what if this number's higher, and we'll do that in a little bit. In terms of income, so you both have your incomes today. That income today is covering your needs today. But when you retire, of course, that income goes away. And the income that you will have is there's a couple of pensions that you'll have coming in. And then each of you will have Social Security. So looking at that, you'll have Social Security, you'll have pensions, which is going to provide a nice floor, a nice base of here's income that you have before you even have to think about pulling money from 401ks, from the trust account, from anything like that. Along the way, between now and retirement, you're contributing 10% to your 401k, Hillary. Mark's contributing 6% to his. So there's some contributions going. So the reason I'm glad we're talking about this now is this is 10 years out. This isn't just a, hey, here's where we are today. Can we do this? This is, we want to do this in 10 years. Here's where we are today. All kinds of things can happen over the next 10 years, whether it's different savings amounts, whether it's different income amounts, whether it's just different changes you make today, wanting to understand the impact on that long term. So what we just looked at is where you are today and some assumptions of when are you going to retire? What is your income going to look like when you retire between pensions and Social Security? What are you going to save along the way? This is just a summary of your cash flows starting today and going to retirement. So for example, we can see that for the next 10 years, we can assume that you're going to have some salary. Now, you mentioned to me there might be some salary changes either for yourself or for Mark over the next 10 years, very likely that something will change. We're just starting with the assumption of taking what you have and adding an inflation adjustment to it. But what we're more concerned about isn't just where are you today? What we really want to know is 10 years from now, are you going to be in a position to where you and Mark can fully retire, travel, and just fully enjoy without having to think about, are we going to be okay? Where's income going to come from? And I'm curious, before we go through some of the numbers, what's your level of confidence in your ability to do this? Do you feel as if you're on the right track? Do you feel as if you have no idea? Do you feel as if you're way off track?
I am uh, actually a numbers person and had, set up a spreadsheet. And I've heard don't use spreadsheets, they're no good. But I did set us up a spreadsheet and I included inflation and, I could set the rates of return and everything. And I felt like it seemed like it wasn't so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure, I probably didn't include specifically healthcare costs, like things that you're including, with the software. But it made me feel like this doesn't look so bad. And then I actually did meet with someone and they said, yeah, you should work till Mark's 70. And that
Yeah.
that really then set me the other way where I was like, oh, I thought things weren't as bad as he seems to think they are, but maybe he's just really cautious. So
This was a one-time engagement with a financial planner that gave you a
yes.
second opinion? Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, not that this isn't the point of the episode, those can be great. Get a checkup, get a gauge. If you're doing a one-time engagement with a financial planner and they're not going to be there for you to kind of see things through, see the implementation through, this isn't a universal comment, but oftentimes I find they're more concerned about saying advice that's going to limit their long-term liability as opposed to, yeah, you could do this, because if something does go wrong, then they feel like they're on the hook. So just a point that I do want to make, that sometimes those one-time things can be very helpful for a second opinion, but I find oftentimes they're going to be a little bit more conservative because they want to limit their liability of what they tell you, because they're not going to be there to, of course, help with the actual implementation. Because I'm with you. You're a numbers person. You've gone through this. And as we start to go through this, Hillary, what I want to start with is fast forward to retirement age. So 61 and 65, essentially. When you retire, income stops. So you can see here salaries are going away. And at that time, some income does start to kick in from pensions. So Mark has a pension that would start here, $1,000 a month. Hillary, you have a pension, $7,600 per year that starts at your age 65. So you do have some income that's immediately coming in to help with some of this. It's not covering everything, but it's coming in. Then you also have Social Security. Social Security kicks off for Mark at his full retirement age. And then Hillary, Social Security starts for you at your full retirement age. This is just when we're a starting point. This isn't to say that's exactly when you need to collect it. But what this is helpful to look at for is income is not always consistent in retirement. It's not like, okay, salary goes away and then all of a sudden we have two Social Security sources, two pension sources, two investment sources, all starting at once. Income oftentimes is staggered. One pension starts, then the next starts. One Social Security starts, then the next starts. In the meantime, what we have to look at is we have to understand, what are your total income sources? So this column here is saying, here's what your total income might look like. And what we have to compare that to, we see, here's your total income. We want to know, how does that compare to your expenses? Well, what are your expenses? In retirement, your expenses are going to be the $24,000 per year in today's dollars, but adjusted for inflation. So $24,000 per year, adjust that 3% per year as a starting point. That means that here's what that number will actually look like as you get closer to retirement. Then on top of that, as you mentioned, there's still housing. So that $2,000 per month isn't covering your mortgage and everything else. That's separate from your mortgage. So here's what your mortgage will look like in terms of principal, interest, taxes, insurance, so on and so forth. We have to add in some healthcare costs, so that when we look at your total expense number here, that's a combination of healthcare plus housing plus the $2,000 per month in today's dollars, but of course, adjusted for inflation. And then, of course, there's going to be some taxes that need to be paid in order to net this amount. Meaning you don't want $2,000 coming in and then it's, okay, Hillary, take that, pay taxes and live on what's left. It's, you want that after taxes have already been accounted for. So what we're looking at is, and this is probably what you saw in your spreadsheets, is here's your income coming in this column. Here's the expenses in this column. Here's the difference. So the difference being, Hillary, this is what needs to come from investment accounts. so that you can supplement your pension or supplement your social security and have enough to pay taxes, pay health insurance, pay the mortgage, and then have the $2,000 per month left over. Does that make sense so far? Any questions on that?
No questions. That makes sense.
Now, many of you might be thinking, this looks great, but how do I apply this software to my own specific situation? Well, that's why we created the Retirement Planning Academy. The link is in the description below. In the Retirement Planning Academy, we walk you through step by step what you need to do to create your own retirement plan and also provide access to this software. So if you want to apply this to your situation, be sure to check out Retirement Planning Academy. What we see is that you're going to have a larger withdrawal for the first several years. And then later on, that withdrawal rate goes down quite substantially. And that's not because all of a sudden you stop spending money. It's because, well, now you have 2 full pensions plus 2 full social security benefits. That's going really far in terms of your ability to meet your needs. And it's almost covering the entirety of it. So much so that one thing we look at is we look at withdrawal rates, of course. In that withdrawal rate, we want to know what percentage of our portfolio do we need to take out to be okay? Well, it starts and call it the 4% range, like we talked about before Social Security kicks in. Then it drops down to the 2.5% range. This is when Mark's Social Security benefit has kicked in, but yours has not yet. And then finally, both of your benefits kick in, and you're taking out less than 1% of your portfolio balance. And so, for perspective, you could probably take closer to 4 to 5% and have that money last for 30 plus years, assuming that you're investing the right way and withdrawing the right way. So, when I look at this, very, very high probability of success that you can make this happen. In fact, the only time that these withdrawal rates spike, is when we're assuming long-term care expenses are kicking in. And that's not because we're guaranteeing long-term care expenses. You may not even need this. This is just saying let's include them to be safe with this to make sure that we're not neglecting a major expense. When we look at this, though, I don't see why you need to work till 70 or why Mark needs to work until 70. Sure, you max Social Security. What have you lost along the way? How many years of travel have you missed? How many experiences have you missed because of working too long? And so really what I see here is a plan that if these assumptions are accurate, you're in a tremendous position to make this happen. Here's what your long-term projection of your portfolio looks like. So today, here's your portfolio balance that continues to grow for the next 10 years or so. Here's approximately how much you might retire with. And that even continues to grow for you throughout retirement because you're taking less on average than you're getting in returns on average. Now, of course, we cannot predict what the market's going to do, but even using long-term historical returns, even numbers slightly lower than that, you're going to be in a fine position. Probability of success, very high, 84% probability of success. Typically, just a side note, the further out you are from retirement, the harder and harder it is for this probability of success to be in the higher numbers, just because there's more years, more time for a potential really bad market meltdown. But assuming that doesn't happen, you're in a strong position. My concern or my question would be this, Hillary, is what if $2,000 per month isn't enough? What if $2,000 per month gets you through the first 20 days of a month, but then it's October 20th, or it's November 20th, or it's December 20th, and you and Mark are saying, we're in France and it's cool, but we have no money to go get croissants or to go get a coffee or to go get whatever it is. How much confidence do you have in that number?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, because it's 10 years away and prices could change incredibly in that amount of time. So I just,
Well,
if
let's
you
start
look,
with today. If
yeah,
this were to
yeah,
happen
yeah.
today,
But if you look at the whole outlying expenses that you had, including the 2,000 a month plus the mortgage plus healthcare expenses, it's way more than we would need to live in France. If that's like literally what we wanted to do is live in France, because the healthcare in France is very cheap. So, that would be if we decided to get resident. I'm just saying, like, it's like I don't know because I just don't know what the situation is. But, $30,000 a year for healthcare is not what I would expect during my
yeah.
time.
So in other words, okay, maybe there's no healthcare and this could fold over into extra
Yeah,
living expenses.
that's
It's an
kind of what I
extra
was thinking. Yeah.
12 grand a year in today's dollars. Exactly right. Now, housing, if you maintained the home, housing would even if you're not living in it, that's a liability still. If if the kids are there and they're not paying rent, or for
Oh,
if
they
it's
would
just
pay
there,
rent.
they would pay rent.
They,
Okay,
they would, yes.
let's take a look at that, because that's actually a big piece of this. Is big picture. I think that you're in a good spot to make this happen. Um, it's, are we accurately projecting what expenses will actually be? And really what will happen is, let's take a look at this. Let's model this out. What if you were to sell the home and you were to rent a place in Europe? And by rent, what I really mean is paying Airbnb for a month at a time.
Hmm.
Approximately how much might that cost? If you were to go to France and Airbnb a property for a month in today's dollars, what might that cost?
High end would be 1,500. I mean, probably 1,000 is um, more likely just because if we're moving around, like if we were in Thailand, it costs $400 a month. So if you want to
Mm-hmm.
be more average, it'd probably be 1,000, but 1,200, 1,500 on the high end, I think. So
Let's look at an average, but maybe on the higher end of that average, and say
sure.
$1,300 a month. Current home, I'm going to assume that you sell. So this is sell home in retirement, and we're going to change the timing of that, not to be immediately, but to be year one of retirement. Because what we're going to see then is no longer, at least in the model that we're looking at, are you maintaining a mortgage and property taxes and insurance for your home here in the US while simultaneously doing all this. I think this more appropriately captures the costs of renting when you're abroad,
Okay.
so that $2,000 that we're planning for is truly 2,000 for you and Mark to spend on food, experiences, etc. So when we do this, that actually has a huge impact, because keep in mind what's happening here is you have about $300,000 of equity today in your
Hmm.
home. After 10 years of doing this, assuming some growth in the value of your property and assuming you continue to pay the mortgage down, that equity just increases. So not only do you go into retirement with your 401ks and your current investment accounts, you might have a pretty good chunk from the sale of your home that you could also use. And that chunk is going to be more than enough to cover the $1,300 a month of extra rent costs that we just added into this. So much so that you're actually in a position to have much more than maybe you would have had you kept the home. And now, granted, this is in liquid assets. You no longer have
Yeah.
the same net worth because there's not a house asset there. You have
Mhm.
liquid assets here. So my question would be to you, Hillary, if I'm to say, not just financially, how do we make this work, but how do we get the best life plan here? If I gave you two options, not that they're binary in reality, but if I said you can either do this on this schedule, so 10 years from now, and spend a whole heck of a lot more when you're traveling, or you could do this, I'm just going to make up a number, 5 years from today, and spend the exact same amount that we currently are projecting. Which feels more exciting to you?
5 years.
5 years. Okay. That didn't take long. So if you could do this today, and when's the earliest that you could see yourself doing that? I know there's children at home. When's the earliest that this could realistically happen?
In my head, 6 years probably. That they both just kind of started college, so a couple years out of college probably would be the soonest I'd leave my kids without, saying, sorry, you don't have a home to come back to anymore, or, assuming that they don't want to rent the house. It depends, but
So that would put you at 57 and Mark at 61, correct?
mhm. Yeah.
So let's assume that you do this. If you sell your home, now what this is going to do is, this is assuming that you sell your home 4 years earlier, which means there's going to be less equity in 4 years from now, simply because 4 fewer years of growth, 4 fewer years of mortgage pay down. It's also going to mean there's 4 fewer years of putting money into 401ks, assets growing, all that stuff. So let's see, is this still potentially doable? In this strategy, yeah. Now it's almost ironically, this scenario is almost exactly the same in terms of wealth over time as the first scenario we looked at, of
Hmm.
work 10 years, do everything that you're doing, and then make this happen. Selling your home, and another way to think about that in unlocking that equity is, think of it as like it accelerates this plan by 4 years. Now, I do want to be very clear. This is assuming growth on the property and things happening. If there's a major housing recession in year 5 from now, obviously this isn't going to look like what it's looking like. But based on these projections and what we're assuming, that could accelerate some things. As you think about that, How comfortable would you and Mark be taking off at 61 and 57 to Europe, knowing that you don't have a property anymore, you don't have that asset anymore, and all of your money is what's in the bank account and just your investments? Any concerns there?
I do not have concerns. That was actually on my list of things I would like to do is, I mean, I'd even sell the house today just because I feel like our assets would grow faster than the housing prices are growing here, but I don't have a crystal ball. So anyway, my husband is not really interested in selling the house today as I am. So
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
anyway, yeah, it's exciting to think about. And I think I would feel comfortable with that, especially because I want to sell the house eventually anyway.
Yeah. What are you doing when you are 81 and 85? Are you still in Europe or are you thinking you're back in the States at that point?
I think we would be back in the States. It probably depends a lot on what my kids are doing by that point as well. So I can't say. But we would not need to live in an ex as expensive an area as we do now. We would, be willing to live in a smaller town, farther. We have to stay right now because of my husband's job. That's
Mm-hmm.
keeping us in this area that costs more, the higher cost of living. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You strike me as fairly frugal people. You're not overspending. You're not, you can do a lot with a little, it sounds.
we try.
Yeah. Well, it's great. Here's my concerns. That's less, yes, there's financial things that happen. I want to go back to what you said at the beginning is you have been out of the country, with the exception, of course, driving into Canada and Mexico briefly, one time.
Yes.
And I have seen instances where someone does things one time, they have the time of their life, and then this future picture emerges of that's everything, and I can't wait to get back there. And then there's a little bit of a letdown when they get there because it's not the same feel as that 2 week vacation. What can you do? What can you and Mark do between now and then to truly see, is this something we could see ourselves do? Do you have the ability to take more trips, longer trips, and actually try this on for size before committing to it?
My husband only has 2 weeks of vacation at his current job. So we can't really take long trips per se. I mean, we could take a 3 week trip. He doesn't lose his vacation every year, so he can store it up. You know what I'm saying? We could,
Mhm.
I think a 4 week trip would probably be too long. Well, we could maybe get 3 weeks at some point. But we do plan to travel between now and then to different areas to, continue traveling at least. But maybe not as long of a trip as you're thinking.
Mhm. What about financially? If I were to say you have to go take that 4 week trip uh, sometime within the next 6 months, does it take a while to save up the financial resources to be able to do that, or is it more just a time constraint?
Both. Although I've been hoarding airline miles, so I'll be at about a 500,000 pretty soon. So I am trying to travel frugally as well. But yeah, I think especially with 2 kids in college right now, the saying I had to take a long trip in 6 months, it doesn't feel like financially is a good now's a good time to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah, circumstances right now are just going to be a bit different. But one thing where my mind goes is hypothetically, what if it was, yeah, we'd love to take these trips and try it on for size and almost practice retirement before we actually retire. We just can't do so. Well, what if, what if you, I won't say zero, but what if you cut your savings rates in half? Just hypothetically for a second, what would that do to the plan? Well, what does that do? Um, there's less, your probability of success is a little lower, but just marginally so.
mm,
But to me, and I'm not saying this is the only way of doing this now offers some extra cash flow that you can say, Mark, let's actually do this. Let's actually, and I don't know what his job situation's like. Can you get 3 weeks paid vacation and then maybe 1 week unpaid? Of can we save up to take that off and truly do this? Because if we're going to do this, it sounds incredible, but we really want to make sure that it's for us because we might find it's not, or how can we do as much as we can do to prepare for this? At this point, savings is important. Continue saving, especially when there's a match concerned. But what I want to really see for the two of you is trying this, experimenting with this to truly make sure that's what you want. Because I don't want to say you're going all in, but you're kind of putting all your chips in of selling the home,
yeah.
potentially moving over there long term. Obviously, you could come back, you would still have cash, you'd still have investments and everything, but really just doing that as much as possible. Have you thought about that, or have you talked to Mark about what that might look like?
I have not. It hasn't quite, we haven't quite gotten to that point yet.
Mm-hmm. As we coming back to the numbers here, is there anything that's unclear, anything that you want to see here where your mind goes, well, what about this or what about that as we look at different scenarios?
I'm sure if I thought long and hard, I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, though.
So the cool thing about this, Hillary, is really when you think about retirement planning, it should be about what big, audacious dreams do you have for your life and what life can look like? You have that. Mark has that. And I know that you're at the very beginning stages of this and even feeling like, oh man, maybe we got a little bit of a late start. But here you are, 10 years out, thinking about what do we want to do to make the most of this. Assuming things go okay, that's an assumption. It's not a guarantee, but with markets, with inflation, with housing, all that, 10 years from now, probably can do this. If you commit to selling the home 6 years from now, probably can even do this. The two things that I think are your homework, the things that I would focus on is one, practice this, try this, take the trips, do the travel, see if this truly is what you want to do. And then number two, as much as possible, track those expenses, get a real clear sense for is what we think it might cost lining up with the reality of what it actually does cost. Because if it does, I think you're in a really good position to make this happen. But with that, I just want to say thank you very much for joining me on today's Retirement Makeover. Exciting to see the big, ambitious goals that you have. And thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much, too. You had some great ideas that I'll keep in mind. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hillary. Root Financial has not provided any compensation for and has not influenced the content of any testimonials and endorsements shown. Any testimonials and endorsements shown have been invited, have been shared with each individual's permission, and are not necessarily representative of the experience of other clients. To our knowledge, no other conflicts of interest exist regarding these testimonials and endorsements. Once again, I'm James Knoll, founder of Root Financial, and if you're interested in seeing how we help our clients at Root Financial get the most out of life with their money, be sure to visit us at www.rootfinancialpartners.com.